How are you guys? Welcome back to Wargame in China. And in front of you, you can see the forces that I used for the campaign of the January 28th incident in Shanghai 1932. So today I'm gonna do like an epilogue on that campaign, talk about the figures I used, talk about what I learned from that campaign, thank the people that helped me, and listen, I'll be honest with you, this is going to be a long one, so either turn it off now or go or hit pause and get yourself a drink, because this could be going on for a while, because I've got a lot to say and I want to get this this campaign behind me and move on to other campaigns in China. Now, as you can see, everything here is part of my collection, and it's all in 20mm, 176, 1/72. And a lot of the things I built myself, and a lot of the things are just plain, well, mistakes is something you make by mistake, but I knew a lot of the deficiencies the forces I was using had, and I just had to play this campaign with using a bit more imagination than usual, but I'll explain that. Okay, now first off, I'm going to talk about the IJNLF, the Japanese Navy. Now, in 1932, when the fighting breaks out, the IJNLF in Shanghai were organized. Well, I've done a video about the IJNLF, so you can go watch that. But this is a, they failed. The IJNLF never had units strong enough in manpower and firepower to really project itself on the battlefield throughout the entire battle. Now, although the ships of the Japanese Navy will supply overwhelming firepower during this battle, the Navy had to go to the Army for help. Now, out of this, in October of 1932, the SNLF is created. That's a Special Naval Landing Forces, not just Imperial Japanese Naval Landing Forces. The Japanese Navy will create the SNLF. Now, I'm not going to really talk about the SNLF today, except that to say the SNLF was an attempt by the Japanese Navy, I believe anyway, to make sure that the lack of training that its personnel had shown would never happen again. Now, you can see that there's tanks here. The tanks are ICB, and they were very difficult to build. The Otsus, the Somo, I built myself, as you know. Then I gave them a few trucks. Now, for the landing at Changhua Pang, I had built these 3 Socrates and decided to use them as destroyers, and I used these 6 landing craft, which I think are from a toy company, so they weren't correct for Japanese forces, but it didn't make much difference, did it? Doesn't affect the dice when you get some things wrong, and when you're a solo player at home, you can do things that you wouldn't necessarily do in a club. Like if you were doing a club game, you would have to have the right landing craft. But when you're playing at home, you can be a bit more forgiving of your forces. So although the Japanese naval forces, there will be more fighting involving the Japanese Navy in 1937 in Shanghai, and you'll find then that the troops in the uniform of the Japanese Navy on the ground, whether they be SNLF or SNLF, perform superbly. But in this battle, the Japanese Navy took it upon itself that it had a lot to learn. It would increase the amount of AFVs in service in Shanghai. And of course, one of the things that I got wrong, and thank you, Austin, was now I built this for the 37 Battle of Shanghai, as I said before, their Naval Brigade headquarters, the Naval Depot, so it wasn't right for 1932, and I had suspected as much, but thank you very much, Austin, for sending me those pictures. And I'd like to thank Alexander Wong, Star Urib, Jalen, I'll make Jalen, Raymond Chung, and Hungbo Guo for all their help in doing this. To AY Militaria, thank you for doing an inspirational channel, and I'm sure there's many more that I haven't thanked, but thank you for your help doing this. Now we're going to move now to the changes, one of the more fundamental changes that the Japanese Navy would make to its forces in Shanghai. Now, as I discussed before, the Naval Reserve Infantry Regiment, which had consisted of Japanese natives of Shanghai and elements of the Yakuza, had performed abysmally. So, in order to rectify that, what the Japanese would do is they would secretly construct strong points out of buildings they owned throughout the Hankyu and Jiabai area. These buildings would be heavily reinforced and have arms and very large cases of ammunition stored there. Now, the Chinese found out about these the hard way in 1937, when these strong points would really hamper the Chinese advances in some areas. So that's what the Japanese Navy had learned, and how it differed the use of the Naval Infantry Reserve Regiment of Japanese locals. And that's not to be confused with the Japanese Army's Reserve Regiment. It's not the same. Now, as you know, going back to the Navy, I used the red box French sailors from the Boxer Rebellion. I made my own quick firing guns, and I made these Chiodas, took part. Otsus from a lovely guy in Tasmania, Os Models. I had FT-17s from Hat Armour Fast, posing as NC-27s, because this is the only campaign I would have needed NC-27s for, because they only served here and in the force driving on Harbin. So I didn't really worry about the tanks being wrong. And in fact, as we look now at the Japanese Infantry Regiment, the air-fixed Japanese Infantry Regiment, we'll see that it's totally wrong for the Shanghai 32 campaign for so many reasons, but no manufacturer makes Japanese figures for 1932 or early war winter Japanese. I'm sure there'd be a market. If any manufacturers are listening, I'm sure there'd be a space in the market for early war Japanese infantry, especially if they were in winter gear. But they're not on the market now. So what you're looking at here is a Japanese infantry regiment, mainly of airfix. Now, again with imagination, I just pretended that all the 70mm infantry guns, battalion guns, were 37mm infantry guns, Type 11s. So I didn't field any Type 11s, but I just used them as Type 11s. My Type 96 anti-tank gun, 37mm, I also use that as a Type 11. Now, these, as I said, they represent a triangular infantry regiment. Now, if you look at the amount of trucks, that is actually a lot of trucks for a Japanese force, because no Japanese infantry division ever had more than 200 trucks. So don't worry too much about getting trucks for your Japanese forces, because mainly trucks were for supply, the railways and feet were for moving troops. Trucks were for supplies and logistics. Now, as we look at the Japanese forces, you'll also see that the uniform they're painted in is a bit lighter brown, with hardly a hint of green in it, because as the Kwantung Army had been in China for such a long time, it had started getting its uniforms made in China, and they were a lot browner than the standard Japanese Army uniform. As you can see also, in order to look, one of the things I didn't want to do in this game was to be constantly rolling lots and lots of dice for the Japanese naval forces that you couldn't see. So I decided to field an extra artillery element, which would be right if this was if it was a square division. A square division would have its own extra artillery to what would be on the artillery division table. I can't remember what the term is, but yeah, a field gun detachment extra on a square division per brigade. So I went for the 105s, 75mm, 75mm, mountain gun 75mm, twin mortars for a mortar company. So yeah, that was the Japanese infantry regiment. I made sure I included horses, because I think horse-toed equipment is just nice to see on any game, and it would be right for the era. Even though, you know, there are a lot of Japanese artillery tractors available on the market now, you would be surprised how much artillery the Japanese were still moving by horse. So there you go. There's the Japanese forces that are used. All plastic. And now we move to the Chinese forces. Now, for the Chinese, it really was a matter of, again, ignoring the things that were wrong. But as I said again with this army, the air-fixed Brits, World War I British, would be perfect if they didn't have a backpack. So there you go, that's a brigade. What you're looking at there is a brigade of infantry of the 19th Army. Now, a brigade in a Chinese army is just the same as in the Japanese army. It's generally two regiments. So there we see 2 regiments of the 19th Army, 1 machine gun per battalion, and battalion HQs, then a regimental HQ, and then brigade HQ. And as I said, the weapons that you see are the only weapons that I used for this campaign. It was a large army. The Japanese would eventually commit 60,000 troops to the battle, and the Chinese approximately 90,000. So you know, this is just a fraction of what what would have been there. So there's the British. Now, as I said, I made most of the guns myself. I scratch built them from the World War British, and some MR parts, 150mm mortar, Oerlikon, and then we'll move over to the 5th Army, the 87th Division. So as we look at the 87th Division, you know, if you want to look up this division, it's in an episode called The Arrival of the Germanized Divisions, and this was a lot of conversion work to make this regiment, but it was very worthwhile, and I enjoyed doing it, and I enjoyed using them on the table. And then finally, elements of the demonstration division. Now, the first thing you can see about the 2 armies, and my armored train. There you go, my armored train that I've built. You're going to see this. You're going to see this in a few scenarios to come. I mean, if you're going to do China, one of the best things you'll ever do is build yourself an armored train. But as you can see from the firepower difference, the Japanese just have so much more firepower than what the Chinese are available. Also, you won't see any aeroplanes here. I just went through the rules and dice for them, but I actually didn't have any of the aeroplanes for the 32 battle. To be honest, I have been for over a decade now trying to slowly build the forces and learn more and more and more about the Second Battle of Shanghai. So doing this was just kind of it was almost like I was trying to do a test run, a dry run for the big battle when I do it, you know. But it was really good for me because I learnt so much more about understanding the second battle from studying the first battle. Now, as I said, the Japanese army, when it comes to its learning curve and how it will change as well, you're going to see a lot more triangular divisions being formed after 1932. And not many square divisions with the artillery group. But it's really funny for the Japanese army because during the battle of during the battle itself, the first battle, they display so much flexibility. They really don't throw away lives. They manage to, even though very cautiously in some aspects, they manage to achieve most of their orders, most of their objectives, with relatively few casualties. You know, if you look at, and especially if you look at how well prepared some of the Chinese positions were. So we've got to ask ourselves, where does this flexibility of command that the Japanese display in 1932, where does it go? Because there's one thing, by the time World War II starts, the Japanese are not known by then for a flexible command structure and, you know, to use flexible tactics. So the Japanese army, in many ways, I don't know if what it learns is just as I said, it's a very difficult battle to understand because there are, like every battle, there are political considerations, but it's difficult to see what the results were for the Japanese army in a table of organization or a training method. You know, I've never read anywhere of the Japanese army practicing for training for urban warfare. But you know, I do this channel and I do hear from people that can tell me different. So if you can tell me a little bit more about what changed in the Japanese army after 1932, training wise and organization wise, I'd love to know as a direct result of this battle. Now we know that their armored forces would change. We know that they would get rid of the NC-27s. There were no NC-27s because they were useless, and we know the Japanese would push on with their tank program. What about the Chinese? What do they learn from this battle? Well, the Chinese learn that they can beat the Japanese, because as I've said in the previous episode, there are very few parts of the Chinese lines that the Japanese manage to capture in battle. When the order went out on the 29th to withdraw, the Chinese withdrew in the face of the enemy, in the face of the Japanese, brilliantly. The Japanese weren't aware of it until they probed the positions the next day. So for both sides, this battle is claimed as a victory for the Japanese, because all their objective was to clear the 19th Fleet Army 12 miles out of Shanghai, and they'd done it. But for the Chinese army, they knew that the Japanese had actually very, very rarely driven them from their positions. Also, you know, it was as I said, it was an anthropological metamorphosis for the Chinese army in many ways, as the Battle of 1932, because suddenly China's perspective of her soldiers and her armies changed. As I said before, when the 19th Fleet Army entered Shanghai, it was in one uniform, but when it left, it was in another, because the women of Shanghai, the rich women, the middle class women, had manned their sewing machines and raised money and put these men in different uniforms with long padded coats and caps. These men were fed every day by the local populace in a way that no Chinese soldier would have ever thought possible. And these soldiers had behaved in ways that no Chinese person would ever think possible. There'd been no looting. The troops had behaved themselves. So from a Chinese perspective, this was a victory. So what about the commander of the 19th Army? Well, General Tsai Ting-kai will, after this battle, be sent to Fujian province, where he will be quietly out of the way, because, you know, after this battle he's received a bit too much attention and might be a bit too popular, and Chiang couldn't have that, so he sent him away to Fujian province. But we will see him again in the future. There'll be a big incident in 1936 involving him and many of the people I've introduced to already. So what had the Fifth Army learned? Well, General Zhang Jingzhong's Fifth Army had been decimated by this battle. This battle cost the lives of between 8,000 to 15,000 Chinese troops, and probably up to 3,000 to 3,500 Japanese. Now, many of these, the high proportion, the vast proportion of these casualties had been of the Fifth Army, and the reason for that is because the Fifth Army was attacking mainly. Throughout its engagement in the battle, it was on the offensive. Whereas the 19th Army, it might have had offensive roles, you know, battles from here and there, but generally it stayed on the defensive in good quality earthworks and good solid buildings. So the 19th Fleet Army suffered a lot less casualties man for man than the Sixth Army. Now, when we look at the artillery involved on the Chinese part, you have to give them very, very paltry artillery, but you got to give them some. So I gave them the old 77.7mm Type 14s from the Liaoning Arsenal, and Siderius guns serving with the demonstration brigade. Now, China, the mood in China was changing now. It was changing now. People were angry. People were going to be joining the army. China was going to, when the Lytton report from the League of Nations investigated the January 28th incidents, they squarely blamed Japan. And that meant it became a little bit easier for China to start buying arms. But it became a lot easier for China to start buying arms. And she was getting much more sympathy. We've got to remember that the big changing point for international opinion, before this battle, most European nations, especially those with a presence in the international settlement, were probably pro-Japanese, you know. But when they had seen what the Japanese army were doing, you know, to civilians and to capture Chinese troops, and how arrogant the Japanese had become, public opinion in Europe and the West changed very quickly. And this was probably one of the factors that made Chiang think that perhaps if you did have the fight in Shanghai in 1937, Europe would get involved, because certainly these 30 odd days in Shanghai in 1932 do change international public opinion. Now, I want to get now into the history. Now, a lot of you guys, if you're looking at this and you do know the battle, will have thought, Adam, you've put stuff in here that is not in the Japanese accounts. Now, if I listened to the Japanese, read only the Japanese accounts, this would be a very, 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 very boring, one-sided game. And half of the engagements that I would have done scenarios for would have never happened, because this is a very, very heavily censored battle. As far as the Japanese are concerned, you know, they have to keep their dialogue within what they said it is at the beginning to kick out a warlord army out of Shanghai. So when they write their post-battle report, which is available online, you can get it, it's free. It's very dry language. It explains the Chinese more. Well, read it for yourself, you know. But it doesn't give you much butter for your potato, if you know what I mean. So what did I do? Well, I looked at lots and lots of Chinese sources. I must thank everybody on the Axis History Forum. But you know, a lot of this was also just old books that I've read, because, you know, obviously I have a lot of books on China's war in my library. And I took instance from here and from there. Generally, I would have double-checked things and triple-checked things, but for this battle, I wanted to just get an oratory overview, and I wanted to use Chinese sources, and the only thing I checked those Chinese sources with were newspapers from the day. And the reason I did it for this was, again, because it was a kind of a wargamer's way of looking at it. Because we all have seen those 1930s, you know, scoops, and you know, you've got to get the best story out. And I went through lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of American, British, Australian newspaper coverage, Hong Kong newspaper coverage, whatever I could. I really focused on the written media. And then, you know, obviously I was looking at the Chinese histories of it first, but then when I found it in the in the print, in the press, then I would say, okay, I'm going to say that did happen, because as I said, if we only stuck to what the Japanese say, it would be very cut and dry, and you wouldn't really get a good sense of what was happening, especially on the ground with the snipers and things. And if I'd have used the Chinese one, I would have had a lot of things that I couldn't verify. So I only verified them through newspapers. So probably not the best academic approach, but it certainly was a way that I thought would sustain enough or reap enough, harvest enough information, because I'll be terribly honest with you, there's still a lot of aspects of this 1932 battle that are thrown into the reports of the 1937 battle. So I tried to, like I said, for me, knowing that contemporary accounts in written form in books were very contradictory, I decided to just go for the Chinese versions and then verify them through the international press. And you know what? I'll be honest, I was very happy with the results, but I suppose from an academic point of view, you shouldn't say you were happy with the results. But yeah, it yielded me a very good campaign. It yielded me an excellent understanding of the battle. Now, I want to talk now about some of the things that I said. Now, one of the things that I said, which I conjecturized about, and I don't know if I explained myself properly, but there's still, I was talking about Japanese sniper activity in the Japanese rear. Now, it was ongoing for the entire battle, and I said, you know, at the beginning that it's the 19th Third Army infiltrating their best shots, but at the end it's got to be Big doing the Green Gang, and I still confirm this, and I'll put an extra word in on that. You see, if you read various, how do I put this? Because I'm not the very best at communicating. If you read accounts, theoretical or historical, of what people need to have to operate for a long time behind enemy lines, you need a support system. Now, if you don't have a support system, you are kind of operating within a couple of weeks. I think the auxiliaries that the English have trained had a life expectancy of 2 weeks. So this was, as I said, this was intense combat in a very built-up area where civilians might very well have cared for what China was doing, but it doesn't mean that they're going to open their door to let a sniper operate from their roof and then have their house burnt down and their women and children slaughtered in front of them, as well as being bayoneted to death. So this leads me to conclude that the only way that sniper activity could have been going on is had the support of the Green Gang, because this is Shanghai, this is 1932, and everybody is corrupt. Believe me, the Japanese are taking as much money from the Chinese to turn a blind eye from, so civilians can flee. Just like the Chinese, there's not very many moral good guys in this city in this period. So there I've explained there. So I've explained how the Japanese Navy changed, to explain how the Japanese Army didn't change. I've explained the 19th Army, General Jing. Okay, so we'll go back to the 5th Army. So it's basically so badly hammered that any lessons it has learned, there are very few men left to pass on those lessons. So again, it's reformed, and I must say this about the 87th and 88th Division. They are crack divisions, but they are constantly getting almost wiped out. So when you read a lot about partially reorganized or partially trained divisions, you got to remember that from time to time, the 87th Division will go into battle as just as green as anybody else, because it's had that many replacements. It doesn't really get look, I'm going to get into that more in the second battle of Shanghai when I talk about the 87th Division. But yeah, when you read that word, you know, partially reorganized or fully reorganized, you know, be careful, because you know, if an elite division like the 87th and 88th, they were always getting almost wiped out and totally rebuilt. You know, that's why you see them with different equipment at different battles. Okay, so at the back there we've got some homemade buildings of mine I did for the battle. Okay, so thanks again, everybody, for sending me for feedback. Thanks to Mark Bandymore for encouragement. Thank you to my missus for putting up with this. And this is the end of the campaign. But as I said, I'll be going to do and cover more stuff in the future. I'm very much looking at the Great Wall campaign, but it's not easy to build the Great Wall of China, or even sections of it, you know, that are mountainous. It's very, you know, I've got a few challenges ahead of me in the future as to what I'm going to build. So if you think, like, any feedback at all is welcome. I hope I didn't bore you with this ramble about the first battle, but as I said, I've done what I believe so far. I have covered the main battles that will change China: the capture of the Shenyang of the Mukden barracks, resistance at Nanjing Bridge, and then this battle. And we're on a journey now through China's war that we will take up until 1945. So if you enjoyed that, press like, smash that subscribe button. Hey, I've got 75 subscribers. Thanks very much, guys. You know, I appreciate that, because I'm really surprised that there are 75 guys that really want to hear this. But thank you very much. And hey, I'd like a few more subscribers. Let's see if we can get to 100. Alright guys, thanks very much. Take care. Bye.